For our exercise on Greek prepositions, I have excerpted the dictionary entries for the relevant prepositions for the exercise from two different Greek dictionaries. The first, pictured here, is called a shorter lexicon of the Greek New Testament, which Gingrich and Donker, two of the famous four from the BDAG, created on the basis of the BDAG. And this version of the BDAG will probably be much friendlier for non-Greek readers, although also in some ways a little less useful. Let me briefly talk about how to think about these entries in the shorter lexicon. Of course, there's the heading of the entry, in this case the preposition apo, and you get the information here that this preposition, apo, is followed by nouns in the genitive case, and when it is, and it only is, it can have this variety of meanings. It can denote this variety of sense relationships between the noun that it governs and some other element in the sentence. In this particular entry, you get a number of translational equivalents given to you in italics. These are called glosses. You can substitute one of these English words for the Greek apo in the prepositional phrase. But which one you choose will be dependent upon your sense of the relationship between the noun in the prepositional phrase and some other element of the sentence. So you are shown in this particular entry those relationships in parentheses, in normal type. For some reason, it won't be consistent that you get glosses first and then descriptions of the senses in regular type in parentheses. Sometimes it goes the other way, and you get... And we'll look at that in a moment. In any case, apo could function to denote separation or departure, or even name the origin. And this pertains to the noun that apo governs. Let's say apo tes Italias. That is the noun Italy in the genitive case. Are we going to understand Italy here as that from which some separation is occurring? If it's adjectival, some noun in the sentence is separated from Italy. If it's also adjectival, we could choose origin. Some noun in the sentence comes from Italy. If it's adverbial, we might look to the verb traveling. Am I traveling away from Italy? Am I traveling with Italy as my point of origin? That almost seems synonymous now that I say it. But one could also find instances where apo names a different sense relationship. Sometimes, so Bauer, Dunker, Arndt, and Gingrich tell us, it will name the cause for something or the manner in which something happened. Sometimes it will name the means by which something happened. All this happened apo tou pneumatos, from the Spirit. Well, not necessarily away from the Spirit, perhaps out of the Spirit, but in this case, out of the Spirit has the particular, more particular meaning of by means of the Spirit. So you might weigh these things. And there are a number of other senses. It could name agent in some cases. And then these strings of references give you examples where Gingrich and Donker think you will find instances of apo in the sense of from, away from, or out of, in the sense of separation, departure, or origin. And this set of references gives you verses in which Gingrich and Danker think you will find instances of apo being used really to mean because of, from, or with, in the sense of naming the cause of an action or manner of some action, and so forth. Toward the end, you will find special expressions and translations thereof. So we move from the more general to the more specific. When you see apo followed by ton carpon in Matthew 7:16 and 7:20, Gingrich and Danker suggest that the apo ton carpon really means by the fruit. You will know the trees apo ton carpon. Yes, we could translate from the fruit. You'll know the tree from the fruit, but the sense here is that the fruit is the means by which you can discern whether the tree is a good tree or a bad tree. You'll find some idioms, apomerus, for example, which, when it appears, probably means in part. We could think of it literally as from a part, from a piece of the whole, but it really is treated idiomatically to mean in part. So all that information is given in this brief entry. I'm going to scroll down and show you a second one because it has a feature that apo does not, and that is the feature of being used to govern nouns of different cases and thus different sets of meaning. Dia can be used to govern a noun either in the genitive case or the accusative case. And it's given this general gloss of through, but you're going to find that nuanced quite a bit in the entry that follows. This is important. A labels all the senses that might apply to dia when it's followed by a noun in the genitive case. Please notice how far that extends. All of that discusses dia when it's followed by a noun in the genitive case. Then starting with the letter B here, Gingrich and Danker introduce the possible senses invoked by dia when it's followed by a noun in the accusative case. And so all of this pertains to B, and only pertains when dia is followed by a noun in the accusative case. So you want to be especially attentive to that for these prepositions that can govern nouns of multiple cases, often just two. In some instances, a preposition could govern nouns in the genitive or the dative or the accusative. And those, of course, are the most fluid and often complicated prepositions to get a handle on, and again, very important to notice the headings that set off these groups of meaning based on the case of the noun that follows. In this particular instance, in this entry, you get kind of the sense first and then the gloss in italics. I don't know that there's any rhyme or reason to this. The entries seem just to be constructed differently. But we should be patient knowing that it was constructed over the space of not less than 50 years of work by these four men, and possibly a good deal more. Now you'll notice the way the entry under A is constructed, that even the shorter lexicon tries to give you contextual clues that might help you determine the sense of the preposition in a particular context. So one set of meanings is here under what looks like Roman numeral 1 of place. Are we talking about location with this prepositional phrase? Number 2 talks about time. Are we, does the context suggest that the prepositional phrase is not talking about movement through space, but movement through time? And there are 2 sub-entries under Roman numeral 2. Arabic numeral 1 to denote extent of time, and Arabic numeral 2 to denote an interval of time after so many years, at the end of such an interval. And you have a third Roman numeral suggesting means or instrument or agency as a possible sense invoked by dia in particular contexts. So, and then of course there are 4 subcategories of sense here. Now, how you determine is largely a matter of logic. What makes good sense here? What might a Greek hearer of this whole paragraph be led to think is happening here in regards to this this prepositional phrase? If we're hearing a paragraph about Jesus' movements through Galilee, it's likely that we're going to think, okay, the contextual markers suggest place. If we're talking about how long a journey took, or if Paul is recounting how long a time passed in between important episodes in his narrative, we might go with one of these temporal senses, extent of time or interval of time. But we might also think something happened by means of or through someone's agency. So a general gloss for dia is through, and that could mean, through Galilee, through many days, or through the Spirit, something can be accomplished. So these will be the things that you will be weighing, and especially, hopefully, inquiring of established translations, how those translators have understood a particular prepositional phrase in these ways. And, if the translation just has through here, that in itself doesn't tell us, so you'll still have to look to the context to think, are we talking about through in terms of space, in terms of time, or in terms of instrument or agency? And then the second set of meanings, when dia is followed by a noun in the accusative, we actually, again, we could have it, speaking of place, we get the word diameter, like a diameter of a circle, through this dia followed by the Greek word for measure, or the space through the middle of a circle. But very often we might find that dia followed by the accusative indicates the reason, points to the cause or reason for something. So that can be, that's a very different meaning from many of its senses, especially its genitive senses, but something to look out for that also can point us to the argumentative texture of a passage. So much for the shorter lexicon, which is much more manageable. Almost everything here should be intelligible. Um, when we look at the fuller BDAG, we have a lot more information, which it is fair to say is information overload. So, what parts of a BDAG entry can we look at for help that will inform us without disturbing us? Again, let's look at the entry for apo, which we looked at in the shorter lexicon. Again, it tells you that it's used with a genitive. It talks about a basic sense. That's information that isn't in the shorter lexicon. It makes observations about how the preposition apo has encroached on the semantic domain of some other older prepositions, expanding beyond separation to take over the meanings that are proper to other prepositions. Normal language is like this. It doesn't flow within the rules. It creates its own paths, and for anyone learning the language, that's a great complication. Now, we still have major entries that talk about a sense, apo, the sense, it marks separation from a place, whether a person or a thing. I have gone away from James, or I've gone away from Italy. And it gives you, again in italics, glosses, that is to say, English translation equivalents that might be used. Now, the stuff that follows these major headings can bring on a major headache, but if you focus on what is intelligible and don't rack your brain over what is unintelligible, there is still some helpful information here. So specifically about contextual clues that would lead a Greek reader or hearer to understand apo as a marker of separation from a place, and hence as the equivalent of our English from or away from. So if it's used in a sentence with a verb denoting motion, you can leave this slew of Greek alone, but this in itself is a helpful clue. So if you're reading a sentence that's talking about a group going up to Jerusalem, apo, someplace, that's a reasonable context in which to take this as separation. Also, with all verbs expressing the idea of separation. When Jesus casts a demon out of a person, well, actually, ek is often used there, but he could use apo just as well. So verbs expressing the idea of separation. When God separated me from my mother's womb, as Paul talks about his calling in God's plan, you might expect an apo there to function as separation. When it's being used with verbs that mean be on guard or be ashamed. Here's a helpful thing. Away from or from is really not the sense of apo here in terms of English equivalent, but rather be on guard against adultery. Be ashamed of stealing. But you would find in Greek the verb for be on guard with apo, with probably the vice in question. With verbs of concealing, hiding, or hindering a person from whom something is concealed. So again, some very solid contextual clues, and you don't have to worry about any of that. and then you get this very specific, or a bunch of specific examples, where you can pretty much tell from the longer gloss, the longer translation, what is in mind. Here, you know, to be accursed from Christ, hence separated from Christ by a curse, and things like that. Then you get to a second major sense. And again, you can skip over a lot of the things that you don't understand, but notice of place, some glosses, and some examples coming from Scripture. And even if the Greek letters are hidden from you, the English gloss is not. And you can actually see where apo falls in these examples. Usually the word that is the head word of the entry is abbreviated with just a single letter. But if it's modified in form, they give you the whole thing. So, and you know, there are other things in here which are, you know, more esoteric than you will probably ever want. References to special papyri and meanings exhibited there that provide extra support for meanings suggested in the main entry. And in many instances, bibliography. But you don't need to think about looking up those articles or even knowing what they mean at this point. So really skimming for the information that that is evident is a skill that you'll need to learn to use the BDAG. But it can be worth trying to learn because you get all the senses laid out and you get more examples given and more information about the kind of words in context that will privilege one sense of this preposition above the other possible senses. That is to say, those contextual clues that would have signaled for the native Greek hearer or reader that this particular sense of apo is being invoked here.